So, if you've been watching the dailies, you'll know all about this, and if you're not, then perhaps you should watch them. I think I said before, the dailies are basically, I'm doing a daily update on this, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes, straight to camera, just talking about, what we're doing, or rather what I'm doing, and how this is coming along. But today we got loads of lab filming, so I thought we could sort of have a bit of a walk around and see a bit more what's going on. So if I turn the welder off, then we haven't got that in the background, and we'll see what we got. So all this tub's gone in, so I've made all of this by hand, and now I'm putting these corner pieces in. I'm just tacking it in, just so we can see what we got. And what we can do is we'll pop the spare wheel in and see what it fits like. But as you can see, all the mounts are going in. So the whole idea with this, and the reason I'm replacing all of this, is because we had this accident damage in this corner, which had set, that had been a problem, but also the rust had got into it. So we had all sorts of rust in it, which we'll have a look at in a minute, and the bits are replaced. So we had accident damage and rust, which has been the same throughout the whole car. But originally I had to pull it. So I had to weld a piece on here and then pull it straight to get it to fit onto the jig. Now the jig, I had to make all of these brackets up because you can't buy anything for this. So how these select jigs work, you buy your jig and you buy all these towers and all these plates and everything else, and then you can organise these in a certain series because all the holes are numbered. And all of these you can change out the which way around they go on here and everything else. So you'll have a map of how it should go for each car you're working on. So if you're working on a sort of 1980s Volvo or something that they made lots of, they'll have a map, and you'll say, oh well, you put that there and that there and that there, all lines up, and then you hire the brackets off a Select, or if you're doing lots of them Volvos, you'd buy a set of brackets. But they don't do a map for this. And they don't do any of these brackets. So I was a bit cheeky. I saw a picture online of one of these on a Select jig, and of course I could look at the picture and count which holes they'd used and look at what they'd done, and thought, well, okay, if I use that as my starting point, as my reference, that's where I'd start. And then I made the brackets. So I started at the front of the car, which I knew was pretty straight, and I made mirror images of each bracket. I had to centralise the car and so on. And I worked back through the car till I got to the back end. And then we found this was all bent down and didn't line up. So the idea is that, your brackets are all there, bolted on, and you're supposed to put your pin in where it goes, and everything's, hunky-dory and it all lines up. And then you know everything's good. If the pins won't go in, then you know you've got a problem. So it wouldn't. So what we did is we welded a piece onto here, then pulled the chassis rail to get it sorted out, and did all that. Did that on a video. If you want to watch the video, we actually did it, effectively live to camera. It's about an hour long because it took about an hour to do it. So we did that and pulled it straight. But obviously, since then, I've had to replace all the chassis leg and everything. But what you do is you straighten the car before you replace things, because you can't, otherwise you don't know where, nothing's lined up. So that's that. So the good news is that now we know everything's lined up. And what I can do is, with all this welded in, I can take the pins out and pop them back in, and I can take that one out and pop it back in. And that means everything's lined up, doesn't it? If they go in like that, we know everything's in the right place. So that one's only tacked on at the minute. I've got to weld through the perimeter of that, but this one's all welded on. And I'm starting to do this bit. So we're getting somewhere. We're getting nearly there, aren't we? So what we'll do, we'll pop a spare wheel in there to see the sort of fit of it, which is why we're doing it. So I did this last night. I brought this one out to have a look. So we'll just pop that in so we can see how it fits, to sort of prove the point that it fits in the well and everything's all good. There you go. That's good. It's got a nice gap round it. All fits lovely, that's all good. But this is a 16-inch wire, and we got a Cinturato Pirelli. Now with the 15s and the Cinturato, they're really tight in this well. But that's because they've made the reproduction or continuation tyres or whatever you'd call it are too big. So that's a bit of an issue. And I say someone commented about making this bigger, but I've already explained why I can't make it. Well, I didn't want to make the spare wheel well bigger because it alters all of the shape, but it wouldn't be original then. You know, we're restoring this back to original. It's an important car, it wants to be original. But yeah, that looks good, doesn't it? I thought that fits well. And I've done all of our welding through here very much like Maserati did, you know, a bit messy because it's supposed to be. But, you know, that's Maserati's welding. That'll be arc welded with a stick, you know, stick welding, arc welding. And this is MIG, but, you know, I've made it a little bit iffy, you know, a bit spattery to look like theirs. And all my spot welds are the same as theirs. They're all identical. So I'll grab some bits to look at to show why we've been replacing things. And then we can see why everything's been done. So there's our battery box. You can see where I've drilled out the spot welds, it's the same sort of configuration, isn't it? So I've done it the same, and that's why we're replacing it, because it was like that. And what someone had done is they'd plated over this, they'd put a plate over it and riveted it on with some sealant, and they'd gone straight over that, which is the original underseal from factory. You can see the rivets there, look, there's a rivet where they pop riveted it on. So that's what they did, and then they did the same on the inside. You can see that perimeter there, and you see this sort of gummy stuff. Well, that there is like a bit of old builder's glue, isn't it? So they stuck it in there, so, and then just covered it all up with paint and stuff. So it didn't look, you know, at a glance, it looked all right. But obviously, once we had a look at it, you can see there's the rivets. So that needed to be done for that reason. And then if we have a proper look at our chassis rail, we'll look at the spare wheel one as well. Look at that. That is our spare wheel well. I don't know if you can see it, so I'll hold that up to the light. You can see the light through it, shining through it. So yeah, it's all peppered with, with rust. So that was that. So that wanted doing. So that's why why we put a new spare wheel well in it. That's that chassis rail that I've just made and replaced all of that. And that was attached to it, so that was the end of it that went on there. And you can see the sort of damage in here. You can see where this has all been welded up and where it's split there and broken. You can see the mess it was in. So I welded this piece on, which is what enabled me, allowed me to be able to pull it. So I pulled it, and that's how we pulled that straight. But you can see all this was all, it's all creased and horrible, all rusty. Big crease in there, you see it's all damaged and it's all full of rust. So that's why we did that lot. Then that bit, I made a new one of them. I'll just go and grab that so we can have a look at it. You can see this brassy stuff, that's sort of bit of braze where they've used braze and so on for it. But I don't know what this is. I think they've cut this. That doesn't look like a weld. That looks like they've used the gas to cut it. I don't know what that's all about. You know, must have cut it out of an old tin drum or something. But this, I'm assuming, all happened in Caracas, because it went out to Venezuela, Caracas, when it was new. And I think he had a bit of an off with it, and he had to do it. So there's a new one of those. So there's that bracket. There's my slot. That's where the bolt goes that goes into the bumper arm, because the bumper arm slides into here. And you can see that's only tack welded on at the minute. Well, that's because I might want to change the angle of it, mightn't I? So until I get it all lined up, that's got to go on there. And it's got to be parallel with the other one and so on. But obviously until I know, then you weld this on, well, you weld it all together anyway. That gets welded on and it all gets welded round there. But that will come. So that's that bit. So to summarise, boot, floor, made all of that, and the chassis rails, and that's now fitted. It's pretty much done. We got that to go on, and there's a sort of perimeter that goes round here that lines up with these edges. So these bits need sorting out. Then there's another bit goes all the way along here, which I've got to do. Then we've got to put this area back on, and there's a lot of repair got to be done with this thing, and that's where the tailgate shuts down onto. So I'll be putting the tailgate on next week, and then putting all this lot back on. But that one was missing. Let me grab the bits that go with this, then we get an idea of what it is. Right, that's the bit that's got to go back on. So we'll salvage that. But you can see it's got dents in here. And you can see we're just looking at how something had been cut off with a gas axe. Well, that has been cut off, and that was the other one of them. So it was missing that. That wasn't even there. And then there's rust repairs to do. And you can see it's sort of bent here. That's all bent there. So that needs straightening there. So this lot all sort of goes back on here like that. This is sort of reasonable. It doesn't look lovely, but it was reasonable. So that can go back on like that. That joins there. We can reuse that. That can all sort of go back on. Obviously, it's got to go back in the right place. And then we've got the next bit that goes around there, which is that bit. But that lot I've cut off of there. And the reason I've cut that off is that previously they drilled out all the spot welds and then sort of gobbed it back on. Now, this is all to do with this accident damage. You can see it's all the mess it's in around here. And it all, you know, it doesn't line up. It's a right mess. So all this needs sorting out. There's rust in there as well. So there's a lot of work to do with that. So I'll probably have to make a new one of them. And you can see that brassy stuff. That was where it was, where they attached it onto there, you see, because that's the other bit of that. So that mounts on there, you know, like how that does. So that's that. So they used a bit of braze there. So all that's got to be sorted out. So that'll keep him busy, won't it? They give you plenty to watch, won't it, on the dailies? But I don't know how far we get with that before Christmas. But, you know, this will be done, and I'll have made a start. But we're nearly there with the steel work on this, and once the steel work on this is done, it can come off the jig, and I can put that Dino on the jig, and then do very much similar work with that. And this will then get painted. Then all the suspension's going to go back on it, and I'm going to set the ride height and so on. So it'll be like a rolling shell or rolling chassis, and I will then sort out the aluminium bodywork and put that on. But that's yeah, that's next year, isn't it? Which won't be long now, will it? So on that note, I'll say good night.